Prophet Muhammad. Allah chose him to preach and tell the world about how we should keep some black stone. And I am Muhammad, final Prophet Muhammad, Allah's messenger that come from women or men. Who cares as long as I'm white as a sheet, riding a flying horse, the one who no one ever saw, went to a place that does not exist. Do not try to refute it. Remember to drink camel pee, you'll soon smell like me. Too bad you can drink my pee. It would be a blessing, Muhammad. I'm a medic, Muhammad, final prophet, mercy to all mankind. Who cares about some women or Jews? Muhammad, final prophet, Muhammad. Allah chose me. Who cares about some muddy spring or some dirty flies in your dream? I received revelations when I was wearing Aisha's dress. Even Muslims can't comprehend it. Thank Allah for all hadiths. One Jew then poisoned me. I tasted poison in my seed. Right then Allah informed me, do not eat it. Muhammad, 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 final prophet Muhammad. Allah chose me. Who could ever deny this? I am even whiter than a sea. Muhammad, final prophet Muhammad, Allah's messenger. On my deathbed I still have some time to curse all Christians and Jews.
Allah is a false god, a false god, a false god. Allah is a false god, a false god. Allah is a false god, a false god, a false god. Allah is a false god, a false god. And Muhammad is not a prophet. Muhammad is not a prophet. If you want grace and mercy and love, Islam is not for you. But Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the King of Kings who died to save us all. If you just repent and believe He took your sins on the cross, then mercy and grace, forgiveness and love, eternity can be yours. But Allah is a false god, a false god, a false god. Allah is a false god, a false god.
Hallelujah. Let Lord Jesus Christ shine forth. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us. Welcome to another live stream with DCCI Ministries to look at the history of Islam. It's going to be very, very fast track. So you will never went through history that far tonight, until tonight. And I do have Robert Spencer with me to help. Actually, he's the one who is going through the history. We are just listening and learning. Peace of Christ be with you, sir. How are you?
With your spirit. Very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming. So we are going to go through history of Islam. We did have a couple of episodes in the past, and then we stopped in Caliph Ali. But before I ask you what we have after Ali, how have you been? What has been happening from your side?
What has been happening? A lot of jihad. The people don't
I
realize that it's still going on, but at jihadwatch.org, I track it every day. And then David Wood and I do the show every Wednesday, This Week in Jihad, that summarizes some, but not all, of the jihad activity for the week. People, I think, don't understand that it is still very common, especially in the United States. They don't realize because it's mostly happening in France, Germany, as well as in Africa and Asia. And the awareness is almost nil. Most Westerners assume that it's all over, that it's something that we dealt with on 9/11 and right after that, and that it's a matter of history now. Unfortunately, that is not the case.
So it's all. I watched your last Wednesday's episode where you kind of talked about what's happening in London with Ramadan lights.
Yes.
It just made me to kind of concern for the safety of brothers and sisters, because Ramadan is the time of the year.
Safety of whom? I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You said you were concerned with the safety of somebody, but I didn't catch who.
Yeah. I'm concerned of safety of brothers and sisters around the world, because Ramadan is the time when Muslims start being more devoted. We get to see more jihad.
Yes.
So I am guessing you might need to consider journey to Ramadan, extend your live streams more than an hour to cover all. Hopefully that will open the mind of people.
One would hope, but I don't think an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or 12 is going to make a difference. Some people, it's a spiritual blindness, as you well know. It's a refusal, a strong delusion that they have accepted, that they refuse to acknowledge the truth because it's not convenient for them politically or socially. And so no amount of evidence will convince them. It's not a rational thing.
I am very grateful Jihad Watch live streams this week in Jihad, because I kind of try to follow the news as much as I can, but as you express your live streams, news doesn't share everything how it is. So get to learn lots of things and be aware of the things. It helps me for prayer purpose. Also, it helps me to be more aware and then get out there to do something about it. So thank you very much for those live streams.
Well, thank you.
So
you can go to jihadwatch.org every day. There is the news about jihad as much as we can post.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So we've been talking about how Islam spread. Sadly, it was very bloody soon after, while Muhammad was alive, and then soon after his death. And then last time when we met, we talked about Abu Bakr, we talked about Umar, Uthman, and Ali. You expressed it was like pretty bloody times within Muslim community as well as outside of Islam. I kind of thought tonight we can have a kind of follow-up session of what happened after Ali. We've got big history of Ottoman Empire around 1400s, but what are the kind of things needs our attention from 661 to 1400s? As much as you can help us to learn, that will be very helpful.
In 661, Muawiyah became caliph. He had waged war against Ali with help from Aisha, and he continued the conquests. He was not always successful. He completed the conquest of Persia and the destruction of the Persian Empire, which was one of the two great powers of the day. But he went against the other great power of the day, the Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, in 675, laid siege to Constantinople for the first time. Now, this was the beginning of a nearly 800-year-long jihad to destroy the Roman Empire. The capital, Constantinople, was the greatest city on earth. It was renowned for its beauty, for the magnificence of the churches that were there, for the beauty of the rest of the city as well, for its geographical location, as you are no doubt familiar. And it was the leading city in the Christian world. as well as the capital of the Roman Empire, which was the Christian Empire. And so it was a very great objective for Muawiyah and his successors. And they attempted first time to take the city and destroy the empire in the year 675. But the Romans had a weapon that was a secret weapon, very closely guarded secret, known as Greek fire, that was essentially that. It was some incendiary device that they were able to spray onto the ships of the Arabs, and the Arab ships would catch fire. And they were able to turn back the siege in this way. But it was just the beginning. As I say, the attempts to destroy the empire went on for nearly 800 years until finally it was destroyed in the year 1453, when Constantinople was finally taken.
Just, sorry, this question is going to be a very silly question, but I'll ask because I don't know the answer. So, soon after Ali died, in-house fights within Islam finished, therefore they are attacking, they are taking new lands, or there is also fight within Islam?
There are also fights within Islam. And they came to a head at Karbala in Iraq in 680. And at Karbala, you have Yazid fighting against, Yazid is the son of Muawiyah, and he's the next caliph, and he's fighting against Hussein, who is the son or grandson of Ali.
He's the son of Ali.
Yes. And he's got practically nobody with him. He's standing there in the story holding a Quran, and Yazid strikes him down. But this just solidified the split in Islam between the Sunni and the Shia. The Shia being the party of Hussein, and the Sunnis, of course, being the party of Muawiyah and Yazid. And even to this day, in Muharram, there is the commemoration among the Shia of the death of Hussein, and they beat themselves with chains, and they cut their heads so the blood pours down, because they are punishing themselves for not saving Hussein. And if you say, but you weren't there, you weren't born for another 2,000 years or 1,400 years, they would mock and scoff at you, because they have a very collectivist mentality that if they are of the Shi'at Ali, the party of Ali, then they were there. And they did not save Hussein. And so they deserve to be punished as a result. And this is one reason why we see Islamic jihadis killing random people in retaliation for wrongs done by other people. And so you have people in Denmark drawing cartoons of Muhammad, and a nun, I forget where she was, in Somalia, I think. But in any case, a nun was murdered because she was a Christian. And the assumption is that Denmark is a Christian country, which is not entirely true in itself anymore. But you take that, and then you can say that Christians drew the cartoons of Muhammad, which is also not true. And then go from there to say all Christians are responsible for the cartoons of Muhammad. And so you kill a random Christian, it's retaliation for the cartoons of Muhammad. And it's the same kind of mentality that leads the Shia to punish themselves on Ashura, that they are responsible for not saving Hussein and defeating the Sunnis. But anyway, this solidifies the split between the Sunni and the Shia, 680.
So since then, they're officially like identified as Shias and Sunnis. Since then, like that, they start. In England, it's funny. In front of Christians, Shias and Muslims very good friend. Okay, so soon after Christians is not around, like there is huge fight. We used to have like Shias and Sunnis stand together at Speaker's Corner to defend Islam. The moment Christians leave Speaker's Corner, we get to hear there's a fight between Shias and Sunnis. So that goes back to 680, correct?
Yes. And of course, before that, because it has its roots, as I told last week or whenever it was, it has its roots in, at least according to Islamic tradition, the insult of Ali to Aisha that goes back to the time of Muhammad and when Aisha was accused of adultery. So it goes back all the way to the beginning, and the split solidified. But even after that, you have the Shia claiming to be the Shia leaders, the Imams, claiming to be the leaders of all the Muslims. But most of them were killed by the Sunnis and had a very small following, as they do today. Today, the Shia are only about 10% or maybe 15% of the Muslims worldwide, but they're concentrated in Iran, as well as having a majority in Iraq, Bahrain, and a significant minority in Saudi Arabia. But otherwise, it's all Sunnis.
Yeah. So Ali's death, Muslims are trying to come to Europe, and then they go and then have in-house fights between family of Muhammad and family of Muhammad fights with one another.
Yes.
We've got official Sunni and Shias, and then do they still went out and then fight with other non-Muslims, or they kind of start dealing with their in-house wars for a couple of centuries?
No, they still fight the non-Muslims.
Right.
Next one is, well, there's an old expression in Arabic that translates "my brother against my brother, and both of us against our cousin." So the Sunnis and Shia may hate each other, but they will work together against the infidels.
Yeah.
And they have no trouble doing that. Even today, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Shiite entity, funds Hamas, which is Sunni, to fight Israel, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad as well. They have no trouble doing that, because the split between the Sunnis and the Shia, even though they hate each other and they're waging war against each other in Yemen, at the same time they hate Israel more. So no problem.
Yeah, brothers love one another, and then they come together to deal with the cousin. In this occasion, it's the infidels. Okay, so when we end up in 8th century, beginning of 700s, we've got, for example, we've got Al-Hajjaj. He was very bloody too.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
He's
I
the
was
one.
in Spain, though. What do you want to talk about Hajjaj?
It's up to you.
Iraq. And so he's
It's
fighting.
up to you. I'll let you to rule.
Well, it's interesting to note Hajjaj in Iraq is actually one of the originators of Islam. Islam was invented by him and Abdul Malik. Before that, you don't have Islam. You have a Abrahamic monotheism that is held by the Arabs as they conquer all this, but there's no mention of Muhammad or Quran, because there is no Muhammad or Quran. And there's an Islamic tradition, as a matter of fact, of an old man at the time of Hajjaj saying, "We never read Quran in the mosques until the time of Hajjaj." And that's it. People are confused by that, because they say, wait a minute, there were mosques and there was no Islam? Yes, that's absolutely the case. The mosques didn't face Mecca, they faced Petra. The mosques didn't have the Quran or Muhammad. They were a kind of a creedally vague sect of monotheists. And then on this basis, on that as a foundation, Islam was built. And Hajjaj was one of the ones who originated it. So the Quran started to be read in the early 700s because the Quran was written in the early 700s and started to just be distributed to the mosques.
Isn't he also the one who kind of pays people money to take their copy of the Quran to tear it up, as well as tortures people?
Tear it up, did you say?
He pays people like 60 dirham to take their copy of their Quran and then tears it up.
Oh, that's because it's a variant reading.
Yeah.
So see, he understands, because this is the time when the Quran is being formulated. And so there are different copies that are different. As you know, the ones that you brought back from Morocco, was it?
Yeah, some of them from Morocco, some of them from Africa, some of them from Middle East.
Yeah, all the different versions. And so he was trying to keep control over that. And that was what that was all about. But of course, obviously, it could not be entirely controlled.
So he kind of compiled the, let's say, Quran together, as well as he started Muslims to read the Quran in the mosques.
Yes. I think Abdul Malik compiled the Quran. He said he did.
Okay, so he was canonizing or officializing?
Well, there's a story. Abdul Malik says, I'm afraid I'm going to die during Ramadan because I was born during Ramadan and I became caliph during Ramadan and I collected the Quran during Ramadan.
Did he die during the Ramadan?
I'm sorry?
Did he die during the Ramadan?
You know,
Was he correct?
I don't know if he did or not. I'll have to look that up. I'll get back to you on that. But
Because he might be the prophet.
yeah, maybe he might have been the prophet. He probably made him up because the point is, he said, I collected the Quran during Ramadan. If Uthman, 40 years before, had collected the Quran, then why would Abdul Malik say that? And why would anybody invent a story in which he said that? It makes much more sense that Abdul Malik actually collected the Quran and was being honest, and then retrojected what he did so as to give it an aura of authenticity back earlier into history. So he said, this is the Quran of Uthman that I've had for 40 years. And then people are not saying, you just made this up. This has no value. And see, they don't have the internet. They don't have telephones. They don't have communications like we do. If Abdul Malik is over here and he says he's in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, and he says he's got this Quran that's from Uthman, and you're from somewhere else, you don't know that it's not authentic. And then Hajjaj takes it and puts it in the mosques and says, this is the Quran of Uthman. You never got it? You have to have it. You must have it now then.
So just a practical question. So Muslims are fighting with one another. Muslims are trying to conquer lands, as well as Muslims are trying to kind of set up Islam with kind of structuring what people should be doing in the mosque and then having the Quran, those kind of things. When they kind of went to lands to conquer them, so what would they teach them on Islam? Because there is option of convert to Islam. What was including in that?
Well, at the beginning, they just destroyed the houses of worship of the others, like Sophronius in Jerusalem. That's earlier, that we talked about last time. He speaks about how they burned down churches. And in India, which is where they get to, one of the places they get to next, Spain and India, they destroy the Hindu temples. But they don't have something very specific to replace it with at the beginning. They put the mosques there, but the mosques don't have Islam. They just have a general monotheism that traces itself back to Abraham. And it seems to be that the creed that originally it was believing is summed up on the inscription on the Dome of the Rock, on the wall of the Dome of the Rock, about how Jesus is not the Son of God and is not the Savior, but is just a prophet. So they have Abraham, they have other prophets, but they don't have all these specifics, and they don't have Muhammad. But once they have all that, then they build on that and fill it in with Muhammad. But you see, there are traces of this. The reason why these things are true and why we can see that this is the way it is, because everything points to this being the case. When you have the early conquests, there's no talk about Muhammad. There's no talk about Quran. And the conquered people actually leave more records than the Muslims do, because they were generally more literate than the Arabs. And they don't speak about the conquerors coming with a religion. It's only later that we start to hear about these things.
Yeah.
And there was something else about this. I've forgotten it. Maybe it'll come back. I'm sorry, I'm getting old.
No, you've got amazing knowledge. You remember all those things. That's more than enough for us for now. I was just
the
I
Umayyad.
just got, I just got a message. I just got a message that Abdul Malik didn't die in Ramadan. So even though he wanted to die in Ramadan, but he died in Shawwal, the month just after Ramadan.
Poor guy. He was probably already. Anyway, I remembered. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The Umayyads. Muawiyah was the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty. He made the Caliphate hereditary, that the Caliph would be his son after him. Before that, they chose the best men, but he made it into a hereditary monarchy. And this is the Umayyad dynasty that ruled the Islam from 661 to 750. And the Abbasids, who came in after the Umayyads, who supplanted the Umayyads, they accused the Umayyads of irreligion. They said the Umayyads were not good Muslims. They never talked about Islam.
They were just conquerors.
Islam? They didn't talk about Islam because Islam didn't exist. You see, they didn't talk about Islam because they were just starting to make it up. And they didn't have all the proliferation of the material about Muhammad and Quran that the Abbasids had. All the Hadith literature comes from the time of the Abbasids in the 9th century. So this is why the Umayyads were irreligious. Otherwise, it makes no sense. Why would you have the rightly guided caliphs and everybody coming out of the time of Muhammad being very, very excited about Muhammad and Islam? And then one of the chief people, Muawiyah, who's the son of Abu Sufyan, who is converted to Islam by Muhammad himself after fighting against him, and he's not religious, and his dynasty is not religious, doesn't make any sense. But if they're just inventing Islam, and most of the invention is carried on after them, then it makes sense that they would not be religious.
So in that case, as they are kind of conquering the lands with all that bloody actions, so all they are doing is building mosques and making people to live under jizya or convert.
Yes.
That's the only option they had. And then I guess in that case, with your theory, practicing Islam, kind of praying 5 times a day, fasting during the Ramadan kind of ends up in the tradition much, much later then.
Yes, yes. And actually, we also hear about the same thing. Just as there's a tradition of an old man saying, we didn't read the Quran until the time of Hajjaj, also there are traditions about exactly that, that we didn't start to pray 5 times a day. We didn't do these things until the time of Hajjaj. And this is because these things were just being invented at this time. The Umayyads conquered Spain, and Islam conquered Spain in the year 711. And
that's very early.
Yes, it was very early, and it was Tariq ibn Ziyad, who is a great commander and warrior of the early period. But he could not have conquered Spain if it hadn't been for a non-Muslim, a Christian who was angry. And this is a lesson for all of us today. Julian of Ceuta, and he had sent his daughter to the court of Roderick, the Visigoth king of Spain, before the conquest by the Arabs. And Roderick took his daughter and had his way with her. Julian was furious and vowed revenge. And when Tariq ibn Ziyad conquered North Africa and set himself up right across the Strait of Gibraltar, which is named for him, by the way. Gibraltar is Jebel Tara, the what is it? The mountain of Tariq, right? That's his place. Tariq ibn Ziyad wanted to conquer Spain, but the Spaniards knew what the Arabs' boats looked like. And the Arabs' boats looked different from the other people's boats. So they were on their guard, and they would always be ready with fire ready to fire on the Arabs' boats when they tried to cross. So this angry Christian gave them an opportunity. He went to Tariq and he said, if you will attack Spain for me, I'll lend you my boats.
And then they went to attack Spain.
Because then the Spanish put their guard down. They thought, oh, this is Julian's boats. We don't have to worry about this. And so they came to the shore, they disembarked, and then Tariq burned the boats. And he told his men, we're going to stay here. We're going to conquer or we're going to die, but we're not leaving here. And this is very important because, you know, people don't understand this. People don't know this history. But Tariq ibn Ziyad is a great hero of Islam. And so a few years back, there was a controversy. That's him, Tariq ibn Ziyad. And there was a controversy in the United States, in Minnesota, about a school that was a public school. And the public school was teaching Islam. It was all Muslim students and Muslim teachers, but they were getting public funding. And so it's illegal in the United States to teach a religion if you're getting public funding. And so there was an investigation of the school, and it actually closed down and then opened up again with all the same people operating under a different name. But there was a controversy for a while over this school, and it was called Tariq ibn Ziyad Academy. And in all the controversy over this school, I never saw anyone say, wait a minute, who's Tariq ibn Ziyad? They probably thought he was some teacher, you know, some famous professor or intellectual or something like that. And nobody gave it a second thought. But I thought one of the most important aspects of this whole controversy is the name of the school. That they named the school after the Muslim commander, really the Arab commander, but the hero of Islam, who conquered Spain and burned the boats, saying, we're staying here, we're going to conquer or die. Now, what's the message for Minnesota and the United States in that? They're staying here, they're going to conquer or die. And they're not going to die. So nobody knows and cares, but I'm telling you, that's what's happening.
I think it seems they are conquering that part of the states, because I read a couple of articles where someone was wearing the T-shirt of Jesus written on it. They were kicked out from the shop. It is the same place where a professor is being fired because she showed the pictures of from Islamic account, historical pictures of Muhammad.
Yes.
It seems they conquered.
Yes, quite so. And also in Detroit, Detroit is not Minnesota, but it's another area where they have conquered already in the United States. Even now, 10, 15 years ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, but David, our friend David Wood, was there with Nabil Qureshi, and they went to an Arab festival. It wasn't even an Islamic festival, it was an Arab festival. And there are Christian Arabs, of course, but they went into the Arab festival, started talking to some of the Muslims about Christianity, and the police came and arrested them.
Yep, they are conquering. They did conquer UK. I think they are already about to finish with US as well.
Yes.
Nothing personal. So
I mean,
when they went to take Spain, was it like very bloody war, or like Spain surrendered easily? Or because I hear, like, even though we are talking about how like they are conquering the land, but when they went to the land, people also welcomed them apparently.
no, that's not actually true. It's interesting to note that Muslims are not honest about their history, and they're always whitewashing it. And yeah, you're right. It was Dearborn. I'm sorry. I'm just, like somebody said, early onset dementia. It's bad. Anyway, it's been nice knowing you. The conquest of Spain proceeded the same way as the conquests elsewhere. And everywhere we hear this, that the conquerors were welcomed because the rulers that were there were so unjust. But there's no truth to this. I can give you, for example, the conquest of Egypt, which took place a little bit earlier in 642, 630s, late 630s. And in 642, the commander in Egypt, Amr, wrote back to Umar, the caliph, saying, and this is according to Islamic tradition, of course, saying that he needed to cover the land with troops. Now, why would he need to cover the land with troops if they had welcomed him? If they had welcomed the conquerors? He only needed to cover the land with troops because people were not welcoming the conquerors. And so they had to be kept down and reminded of who was now the boss. So the fact that he said, I need more troops, I need more money, I need to cover the land with troops, is an indication that they were not welcomed. And it's the same thing in Spain. They were very bloody. They subjugated the Christians and made them pay the jizya and enslaved a great many. As a matter of fact, Islamic Spain, people talk about it now as this wonderful place of tolerance, but it was a center for the slave trade. And they sold slaves from Spain all over the Islamic world. And there was one holdout in the very north of Spain. There was a mountain where there was a group of Christians and they wouldn't surrender. And they were at the top of the mountain. They were led by a man named Pelayo, and he wouldn't surrender. There were only a few of them there, and the jihadis tried to get up the mountain, but the Spanish Christians controlled the higher places. And you know, in ancient warfare, that makes all the difference because they could shower down stones and arrows and all kinds of things and keep the people from coming up. So even though they were outnumbered, they were unassailable. And ultimately, the Muslims gave up and left them there. And it was yes?
So is that like the one close to the France border where 25,000 Muslims versus 20,000 non-Muslims? Is that one?
This was in Asturias, I believe, if I recall correctly.
I'll take your word for that. I am not good with the Islamic history, so
yeah, Asturias, and that's in the northwest, so that's over by Portugal, not to France. And and Pelayo's group, that's from the basis of the reconquest, the Reconquista of Spain, which is one of the only places where the jihad has been rolled back. Usually what they have, they hold. But in Spain, you have 700 years it took, and in 1492, finally, the last of the Islamic kingdoms were defeated. We Latin American never learn history about Islam conquering Spain. We learn about how bad was the Reconquista and the Crusades. It is bad. That's right. That's why I wrote this book, The History of Jihad, to try to set the record straight. You have somebody saying, why does Khatun always invite shameless liars on her live stream? I would challenge you, sir, to come up with one lie, document one lie. You can't do it, and you know you can't do it. You know you're the one lying. Anyway, yes.
With that comment, I think you should take that as a compliment because Muslims know they are lying, and they know during the Ramadan they can lie about other people. Therefore, they're just trying to be good Muslim. And it's always open to that gentleman, Mr. Muslim. We are still waiting him to provide us references or expose the lies we have, but it never comes. So
why am I just anyway? So that's the conquest of Spain and the basis of the Reconquista. And Spain was always a place where Islamic law was strictly enforced, and the Jews and Christians were second class, had to pay the jizya, were subject to constant harassment, the precarious position of the dhimmis, that at any time the contract of protection could be revoked, they could be killed or enslaved. As I said, it was a center of the slave trade. I say all this because there's nowadays a very widespread historical myth that Muslim Spain was this paradise of tolerance and multiculturalism. It's no basis in fact whatsoever.
Well, without lies, Islam dies.
Yes.
So they went to Spain to conquer the Spain. You mentioned also India a little bit earlier. Was it the same structure with India, or Indians were like, wow, come, we love to have Islam here?
It was even
You
worse.
never know.
Even worse in India, because the Hindus were not the people of the book. Now, this is probably right around the time that these ideas were being formulated. In fact, it may be that they were formulated in the context of the conquest of India, and that we have the idea of the people of the book and the non-people of the book because of the conquest of India. But in any case, it is because the Hindus were not people of the book that they were treated even worse than the Christians in Spain. And so Hajjaj, actually, our friend Hajjaj, he told Muhammad ibn Qasim in the same year 711 that the conquest of Spain began, he sent him into Sindh, which is now in Pakistan, but it was part of India. And he said, my ruling is given. Kill anyone belonging to the combatants, arrest their sons and daughters for hostages, and imprison them. Whoever submits, grant them protection and settle their tribute as dhimma. And so Muhammad ibn Qasim actually did this, but then Hajjaj got angry with him because he did it too much. That is, he granted too much dhimmitude to the Hindus. And so Hajjaj wrote to Muhammad ibn Qasim, said this, I am appalled by your bad judgment and your policies, and astounded by your policies. Why are you so intent on giving Aman protection, even to an enemy whom you have tested and found hostile and intransigent? It is not necessary to give Aman to everyone without discrimination. In any case, if the Sindhis sincerely request Aman and desist from treachery, they will surely stop fighting. Then income will meet expenditures. You see, it's all about income, that the non-Muslims work and the Muslims receive the benefits. And this long situation will be concluded. It is acknowledged that all your procedures have been in accordance with religious law, except for giving Aman. And so, because you're giving Aman to everyone without distinction between friend and foe. God says, give no quarter to infidels, but cut their throats.
That's very, very much merciful. So
Yeah.
kind. I can see why Muslims are saying, yeah, when we went to conquer the lands, they welcomed us. Yeah, it just makes so much sense to me now. So while like it's pretty violent, it's very violent, and today India is, I think, third biggest Muslim majority country. So when we talk about India in 7th century, we are talking about a little bit of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. So that land, it's right now it's like third biggest Muslim country. It doesn't look like they know anything about their history or how they were, how their grandparents were like killed or persecuted.
No, I tell you, I cover the jihad against India in detail in the history of jihad. And I hear from people in India quite often, and they say they never knew any of this. They're not taught it in the schools, and the Muslim conquerors are held up as heroes. And so there, much later, there's the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, and he was especially bloody, especially violent, an extraordinarily evil figure, but he's celebrated as a historical hero in India. And I mean India today, shorn of Pakistan and Bangladesh and Afghanistan, the primarily Muslim parts, although there's still, as you noted, a very large Muslim population in what is India today. But even in India today, these people are considered heroes, and most Indians do not know the terrible history.
Well, in that case, I'm very grateful for the book you produced. And I encourage, if anyone hasn't read it yet, History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS, please grab it, read it, and create opportunity, and then give it to your Indian friends. Doesn't matter what religion they follow, give it to them so they know what happened in the past. So you are talking about 8th century right now. You talked about how they conquered Spain, how they went to India to conquer India. At that stage, they still, my understanding was, they still don't have the biography of Muhammad. They still like kind of trying to structure Islam with what you said. Yet they are kind of still taking over. So where is where kind of the time comes when there is a big war between Christians and Muslims?
A big war between Christians and Muslims, well, that's kind of going on, right? I mean, you have Spain and you have Constantinople. So both ends of Europe, the far west and the far east in Europe, you have Muslims trying to advance. And
so what is the real story of, or history of, Crusades?
Crusade.
So we get to learn that at school, and also someone mentioned in the chat they learned that as part of the history. Even in British Library, a couple of years ago, they set up Islamic room. So you go to the British Museum. In British Museum, so they've got 2 rooms all about like Islam and its history, but mainly focused on like dress, all those kind of things. You just get out that room by thinking Islam is very peaceful, and then you walk through the room, it's all about Crusades. The message is very clear there. So what is the real history of that?
The real history of the Crusades goes back to the time of the Caliph al-Hakim. Romania is a little bit... Romania is actually part of the area of Eastern Europe that was conquered by the Ottomans after they were led into Europe by the Romans in the 14th century. There was a claimant to the throne in Constantinople who asked for help from the Ottomans and let them into Europe. And they never left. They still haven't left. But in any case, so Romania is part of that. But the Crusades go back to the Caliph al-Hakim at the beginning of the 11th century. Yes, the first crusade began in 1095, but in around 1009, so almost 100 years before that, al-Hakim destroys the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And he also levels a lot of other churches in the area. And so the Christians are put at through a terrible persecution at this time. Also, Christian pilgrims begin to be attacked, kidnapped, enslaved, forced to convert, or killed. So that's the beginning of the 11th century. Then in 1071, there was a Roman emperor, Romanos, and he led his army. He was not a very good emperor. He was not a very wise individual. And he wanted military glory, but he did not have military acumen. So he led the Roman army out into eastern Anatolia, what is now Turkey. And this was the heartland of the Roman Empire. This area that is now Turkey today was the breadbasket and the place where soldiers were recruited, and the heartland of the Roman Empire. So he went out to the eastern areas of it and engaged the Muslims in battle at a town called Manzikert in 1071 and suffered a crushing defeat. And he was captured. He became the second Roman emperor in the history of the Roman Empire to be captured by foreign forces. And he was captured by, who was it? I'm sorry. It was one of those Ottoman sultans. Bayezid. Wasn't it? Bayezid? I believe it was.
As I said, my history is not good this time of the
No,
Islam.
no, it wasn't Bayezid. Hold on. It's that I'm gonna kick myself when I find it. I'm sorry. But I've got to find it now. Please bear with me. I apologize.
That's okay.
It's a very famous ruler. Very, very familiar name. You'll know him when I tell you his name. But I have to find it first. He captured Romanos. The index, actually, the second edition has a better index. But the index here could be better. Let me see if I can find it here. Alp Arslan, of course.
Yes, yeah, I know Alp Arslan.
Yeah, so he captures Romanos, and he asks him. He likes to talk to him, and they talk every day. And he says to Romanos one day, "What would you do if you had captured me?" And Romanos says to Alp Arslan, "I probably would have killed you." And Alp Arslan says, "I am not going to do that. I'm going to do something even worse. I'm going to set you free." Because he knows that he's destroyed the Roman Empire, Romanos, essentially,
Yeah.
and he's going to suffer for it. And he goes home, and indeed, he's deposed and killed, and that's the end of him. But the disaster, the destruction of the Roman army at Manzikert leaves all of Anatolia open to the Ottomans, and they began to take it. Now, they didn't consolidate this until the 20th century, as a matter of fact, when the last remnants, except for a very tiny group, but the last Christian communities in Anatolia were forcibly expelled. That's why I'm here now. Because my grandparents were exiled from Turkey in the beginning of the 20th century. So otherwise I might have met you over there. I don't know. But in any case,
You might be one of the imams in one of the mosques, or one of the Muslim leader in one of the Islamic schools.
I hope not. My family was Christians there. But anyway, the Roman Empire was deeply imperiled, and the Muslims were advancing through Asia Minor, and the Roman Emperor Alexios Komnenos appealed for help to the West and asked Pope Urban II to send troops, because he couldn't recruit troops, you see. He got his troops in the past from Anatolia. But now Anatolia was largely under the control of the Muslims. So he couldn't even recruit troops to fight back and win it back. So he appealed to the Pope. And the Pope called for the Crusade in the year 1095. Now, the whole thing got out of hand in various ways. The first people who arrived were a bunch of children and priests and monks and things like that, and they were massacred by the Muslims. But then the real soldiers arrived, and they began to fight back against the Muslims. Now, in the middle of this, they had disputes with the Emperor Alexios, and so it became not a matter of winning back the land that the Romans had lost. It became a matter of winning back the Holy Land. But it was indeed a reconquest that was attempted. It was an attempt to drive back the Muslim invaders. And so people have lost that idea now, and they portray it as some kind of a gratuitous attack against the Muslims who were peacefully minding their own business. Actually, the Muslims were advancing, and it was in order to stop their advance and to protect the Christian pilgrims to the Holy Land that the Crusaders came.
So that's like very different narrative than what I was taught and what I heard. You are telling me in beginning of 11th century, as Christian persecution become higher, Christians felt there is a need for respond, and then therefore they were just responding to what Muslims are doing to the Christians, as well as how Muslims are conquering the lands.
Yes, precisely. That's exactly it.
That's very different than what we hear and what we kind of learn. And that went for a couple of centuries, correct?
Yeah, the Crusaders took Jerusalem in 1099 and established Crusader kingdoms. One of them was called Outremer, and that was the longest lasting. And they took Antioch as well, and the area of the Holy Land, and they held it until 1291. And then in 1291, the last Crusader kingdom was destroyed, and the Muslims reasserted their control over the whole area. But the Christians had been there before the Muslim conquest. The Muslims conquered them and were advancing. The Christians took a small portion back during the Crusades and then lost that. But the Crusades are very important for a number of reasons, and one of them is that there were incursions into Europe from the 7th century until the 11th, and then again starting in the 13th. But for the 200 years that the Crusaders were in the Holy Land, there were no jihads into Europe. And so it may be that the Crusaders saved Europe. I would also say the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, saved Europe because they stood as a wall between the jihadis and the Europeans for so many centuries. But also the Crusaders saved Europe because if they had not had those 200 years, then certainly the jihadis would have defeated the Romans earlier than they actually did and driven into Europe, and probably all of Europe would have been Islamized.
So we are about to hit the 1 hour timeline.
Yes.
So you kind of helped us to look through approximate 8th century, from late 7th century to we are around 1300s right now, 1200s.
We'll have to the rest at another time.
Yeah. So
this.
within this 8th century or 7th century, what is the lesson do you think we should have learned? Because you expressed that, for example, how as Muslims were conquering the Spain, they said like, we will conquer or we will die. You kind of brought up, actually, we didn't learn any lesson, but what kind of lessons we should have learned?
What we should have learned is that the jihad never gives up, that if they don't win now, they'll try again later. And so we have to remain vigilant, and we have to go on the offensive ourselves, not necessarily in military action, but in the kind of thing that you do at Speaker's Corner, and the kind of thing that David does in trying to show people that Islam is false and that it's not worth going and killing people for. It's the embodiment of what the Lord said about the time will come when men will kill you and think they're offering service to God. So this is what we ought to have understood, that the jihadis are relentless and they are always on the march. There was never a period in any of the time that we've been talking about when the Muslims said, oh, let's live in peace. Let's welcome our non-Muslim brethren and forget about jihad. That never happened, and it never will happen, as long as they're believers in Muhammad and the Quran.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for opening our eyes to real history as well as educating us. Really, really appreciate. There are lots of things in this live stream. I need to go back and watch it and then learn more, because if you don't know history, you will easily fall into things when it comes again. So really appreciate for all your input, sir. By God's grace, hopefully I'll have you again, and then we continue where we left. I think next time when we meet, we will start with Ottomans.
Okay.
Just remember, I am Turkish, okay, for next time.
And I'm one of the conquered people. It's even worse.
But now we are all brothers and sisters in Christ. We are citizens in heaven, and we are belong to Lord Jesus Christ. So that's the beauty of our glorious gospel.
Yes.
And thank you very much, everyone who joined us in the chat. By God's grace, we will see you again. Once again, Robert Spencer, thank you very much for helping us tonight. God bless you all.